Good morning. So, what are the best foods for menopause? That was a question I had. I know it's the afternoon, it's the morning chat though. So what are the best foods for menopause? Question I had the other day. Now, firstly, there are no specific foods, right? I know that's a disappointing thing to hear. We often want to know that there's like one specific food, right? Um, but I'm going to go through the reasons why, and that's because sometimes we ask these questions because lots change around perimenopause, menopause, and and by saying menopause, this is covering peri as well, and even post. But in general, when these changes happen, when these hormonal changes happen, what we need to consider is sometimes that a lot of this can be from fat redistribution. So a lot of this can stem from this. So people might say, I'm having a harder time losing weight, I'm gaining weight, my clothes aren't fitting so well, and this could be from fat redistribution. So typically, you may now store more fat around your tummy area than your legs, hips, which might not feel as flattering and might not be as nice. And the result of that is that we maybe feel a bit down. Maybe we don't wear certain clothes anymore. Maybe we feel like we've gained loads of weight. Maybe we then think, solid, I'm trying really hard, nothing's changing. And then we actually just end up eating more as a result of that and going, oh, stop this, it's not working anyway. And then we actually gain weight. And we know from research that there seems to be less room for error when it comes to menopause. So those bites, those licks, those tastes seem to really add up. So we need to just be a bit careful there, is what I would say. We need to be a little bit careful when it comes to those bites, the licks, the tastes. The odd handful of crisps, the odd bite there. So, but going back to this, the question was, are there any foods? Well, number one, like I recommend to anyone, is are we eating enough protein? Can we look at getting 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight? This is going to help in terms of hunger. This is going to be help in terms of you get a bit of benefit from the thermic effect of food. So the thermic effect of food is essentially where you burn more calories from digestion and absorption. So that's the thermic effect of food. You're also going to help with recovery, with muscle, retention, which we know is important as we age, because let's face it, if we get weaker, if we lose muscle, our metabolism will go down a little bit, not to mention everything gets a little bit harder, we're not protecting our joints as much. And also, protein is there to, we need more protein as we age as well. So set a minimum, 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight is what I would say to that. So lean proteins, meats, eggs, beans, legumes, all good as well. Yeah, they're healthy foods for many people. I'll come on to that in a second though. And in terms of specific foods, then this went on to another conversation of, okay, what about like soy? What about balancing my hormones with foods? And this is an interesting question. And we talked about soy and isoflavones and flavins, oils, and you name it. Evening primrose, all sorts. So now you have to have a lot. Morning, Teresa, or afternoon, I should say. You have to have quite a lot for it to have any impact. And for the impact that you want it to have, it's not going to make a massive difference. However, that said, I'm not going to argue there's some research out there that shows that higher omega-3 intake, oily fish, mackerel, of course, salmon, seem to help with things like hot flushes, going to help with joint health, heart health as well, which we know women as with aging, increased risk of heart disease, especially with the hormonal changes. So omega-3 isn't going to do any harm in there, right? So omega-3 is going to be a good thing to get in. We know there's some instance of soy intake and reduction of hot flushes as well, which is quite exciting. So that could be something to look at, like soy intake, worth a go. It's not going to do any harm. If anything, you can increase your protein intake from it. Most people would be fine. Might be a few things to consider with thyroid, more on that another day. Might be a few things to consider in people with, I know there's lots of questionable and there's no right or wrong answer with it, with breast cancer, incidences, recovery of that, etc. But that's a different conversation here. So generally, soy, all good in there. So there's a few things right there. Now, let's come on to the next part about, okay, what about, like, I feel bloated a lot. And this was the next part I wanted to touch on. I feel bloated all of the time. How do I know if I'm intolerant? Have I become intolerant to foods? Now, this could be because you are trying different diets, changing your food intake. It could be that we are having more, maybe fiber, foods that need to be fermented in the large intestine, which means that the byproduct of fermentation is gas. So you might feel more bloated, have more flatulence. So just consider that could be something right there, rather than an allergy, rather than intolerance, I should say. It might actually be these foods. So think like whole grains, beans, legumes. These are all foods that need to be fermented in digestion. The byproduct is fermentation, which could equal gas. So that's one thing to consider. The next one on that would be, okay, well, what if I wanted to know if I've got intolerance? Okay, well, you could get a test, but none of the tests are actually accurate anyway. There's no way of actually finding out. If anything, they'll give you a load of false positives. So then you go, oh, I've got an intolerance to X, Y, Z. And that's not that intolerance don't exist, it's just that we can't measure them. That's the key thing. Let me know if that's making sense. So the intolerances do exist, potentially. We just can't measure them. So you end up going, oh, man, I'm intolerant to mushrooms, strawberries, you name it. Loads of random foods. Then it becomes even harder to stick to the diet in the first place because our choices become fewer and fewer, which is not what we want, right? That's not what we want. Good afternoon, Alki, how are we doing? So our choices become smaller and smaller. This is going to be something that I'm going to be touching on in the Q&A in our private group soon in a bit more detail, because food intolerance testing, all of this is becoming quite a big thing, when actually the efficacy of it is really poor. People getting loads of false positives and they're allergic or intolerant, I should say, to so many foods they can't stick to anything. And then it's like, okay, well, what do I do then? Well, if you want to try it, because you could have an issue with eggs, you could have an issue with gluten, you could have an issue with dairy. The only way to really know is an elimination diet. So you eliminate that food, and I'm going to be going over this in a bit more detail in a Q&A, like I said, in our private group. So you eliminate a food, grow it for a specific time, and we measure your responses. You measure how you feel. That's one way of doing it. And then you can't really argue. There is a placebo effect as well, of course, where you've just gone, I think it's going to be it. And you're like, yeah, I think I feel better, because we're so in tune with our responses. But that's something I'll cover as well in terms of intolerance. And going back to the gut. Now, the next question that came along here, and this is a good discussion that I had the other day with someone. They're asking very good questions. The next part was, okay, so there's no point doing an intolerance test. I'll save my money there. What about blood sugar though? And it was like, I've read, and rightly so, that when you hit menopause, perimenopause, that you handle sugar. You don't handle sugars well. You're insulin resistant. Should I go on a low carb diet? Potentially, it wouldn't. If it suits you and it helps you hit a calorie deficit, fine. That's all good. But at the same time, some people actually need that 3 meals, just 3 meals a day. Good satiety foods, like lots of carbohydrates, are actually high on the satiety index. Things like potatoes, oats, they can be fine for a lot of people. Some people though bloat them, don't feel good. Fine, don't have them. And then they were like, okay, so if I keep my blood sugar levels lower, should I track my blood sugar levels then? And this is where it gets even more fatty. We know that from research that so they've done tests on this. So if you track your blood sugar levels to response, and you don't have diabetes, by the way, let's say I have chicken and rice tonight at 5 p.m. and then I have chicken and rice tomorrow at 5 p.m. You would expect that there would be the same response, like the same blood sugar response. But the variation between my chicken and rice at 5 p.m. tonight and then my chicken and rice at 5 p.m. tomorrow, so the variance is the same as if I have chicken and rice tonight and pork and pasta tomorrow. The variance is the same whether I do it or someone else does it, whether I have it at 5 p.m., 6 p.m., 7 p.m., whether I have different foods or the same foods. My point being is that the variance, the varying blood sugar levels, are just as different whether I eat the same foods or different foods, which means it's quite random, which is pretty much debunked a lot of what's being thrown out there at the moment in research about blood sugar levels. You need to make sure that you're tracking your blood sugar, keeping your blood sugar levels low, learn more about what foods work for you. It's more random than you think. You could be stressed on a certain day, you could be stuck in traffic, you could be poor sleep, you could have exercised. If I have a donut and go for a walk, my blood sugar response is going to be better than if I have a donut and don't go for a walk. If I exercise within the last 48 hours, that could influence my blood sugar level. Point being is that it comes back down to what you do on average. Resistance exercise, are you getting that in? Are you getting it in a progressive way? Are you being pushed a little bit? Structured? Are you doing it safely, effectively? That's the number one thing you could do. Protein intake. Could you increase that a little bit more? How could we do that? Do we need to look at food intolerances? Do we need to look at that? And that can be something that we look at. If you feel that's way, I'm happy to work through it with you. In fact, the person I'm chatting with right now, we're doing it with gluten at the moment, and they're just curious. They've also got thyroid issues, and they know in terms of Hashimoto's and things like that. And I'm like, you're not going to be deficient from not having gluten. There's enough gluten-free products out there, etc. So why not try it? And if you want more help doing that, do let me know. Happy to talk through that. And as always, any questions, let me know. I've rambled on this afternoon, and I hope that was helpful though. And any questions, as always, just let me know.